Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine. How are you, Kim?
Great today. Yourself?
Everything is great. Very
Good.
excited. Today we have a very special guest. Mr. Drew Bledsoe is here from the Bledsoe Wine Estates. Welcome, Drew.
Yeah, I'm happy to be with you. It's kind of a little blast from the past. Lived in Franklin my rookie year.
That's great.
Very cool.
Which turns out was over 30 years ago, which just makes me feel so old. I don't know how that happened.
First off, I have to get the one football thing because we want to talk a lot of wine, but I have to get my one football thing out to you because as a longtime Patriot season ticket holder, but also as a longtime retailer, I want to thank you for everything you did for New England. A lot of people don't understand the impact football has in this area for retail. So what you did, I appreciate everything you did for New England.
Well, it was an amazing thing to be a part of. First of all, coming from the West Coast and then coming to the Northeast region that I knew very little about and getting to call that my second home was really a special experience. But then being immersed in the sports culture of the New England region was, first of all, very overwhelming at the start, because out here, sports is sort of a hobby. In New England and Boston, it's more of a religion. So getting to experience that and be a part of that culture was just an amazing privilege. And on top of that, the entire New England region, through it all, really actually embraced me and my family in a pretty special way. And that continues to this day. When I come back out there, kind of feel like I'm returning back to my second home. So it was a really special thing and a great privilege to be a part of.
Yeah, we love when you come back home. Appreciate it. So let's talk wine, Drew. For our listeners who only know you as a football player, please tell us how you got from New England football and your football career into wine and how you started this award-winning winery.
Well, it actually happened in probably the most obvious way. We really like wine, my wife and I do. Really, it was something that we started exploring and learning about, while I was playing ball in New England. In college, we were like most college kids, you drink whatever beer's the cheapest, or whatever you can lay your hands on. But once we got out to New England, we would go out to dinner and we would order wine initially because that's what you're supposed to do, right? We're being very sophisticated and grown up, and so we're having wine instead of beer. But then we very quickly learned that it was a different kind of beverage. It was a different kind of experience. It's something that actually improved your experience with your meal, like the food and the wine went together and elevated both things. And all of a sudden, dinner was a more interesting experience. It wasn't something you drank because you were trying to catch a buzz. It was something that you drank because it elevated your experience at dinner. Well, as we started to go down this wine rabbit hole and started collecting wines and learning about wines from the rest of the world, we learned that my little hometown, Walla Walla, where I grew up, was producing some of our favorite wines in the world. And my little hometown was producing wines that could stand toe-to-toe with some of the most famous and expensive wines in the world. And we proved this because we would do blind tastings at the house. We would have teammates come over, we'd make dinner. Well, my wife would make dinner and I would take credit. That works, right? She does all the work. And I stand by the barbecue for a little bit and then I claim that I made dinner. But they would come over, and so they would always ask what to bring. And I would just say, good bottle of red wine. And you can imagine everybody's pretty competitive, right? These football players, that doesn't stop when you leave the field. So everybody would try to bring the best bottle of wine. And these guys were bringing, fancy, expensive wines from Napa and from Bordeaux. And I think Damon Hewer brought some stuff from Argentina one time. And we would just put them all in paper bags and line them up on the kitchen counter. We would taste through the wines and then we would just vote. We had sort of like this very rudimentary voting system where each one would get a certain number of points and you could allocate points across. Anyway, so we had this voting system. Well, just out of curiosity, I would put something from Walla Walla into this lineup against these very, well-known and expensive wines from these famous wine regions. Well, every time we did that, we did it, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, we would unveil at the end and the Walla Walla wine would win. Like not just like hang in there with these other wines, but actually win the contest. in a blind setting with ourselves and our friends. And for me, it was really an epiphany. That's when the light bulb went off that, hey, my little hometown is not just making wine. They're making wines that in blind tasting are taking down the big boys. And that was really when the idea started to form that, maybe after the wine odyssey was over, or excuse me, the football odyssey was over, after that amazing experience was done, could go back home to my hometown and start a wine business. But I started a wine business with the intent of making wines that would stand up on a world stage. So that was really the inception of the plan. When we started down that road while I was still playing ball. My last year in football was 2006. We had bought our first piece of property in 2003 and actually planted a vineyard. And so when I made the decision to retire from football, it was not, hey, I don't want to play football anymore. I still love football. I've always loved football. But it was because I was really ready to go start this next thing and see if we could create something literally from the dirt and build a business based on making truly world-class wines.
You really sort of took the wine world by storm, I feel like, when you had that first vintage be released. I remember I was working in retail when your wines came on the market, and there was such buzz and excitement and anticipation around that first vintage. And we were like, oh, finally have this wine. So it was really exciting to taste it like right at the beginning of what it was. And it's nice to revisit it again all these years later.
Yeah,
it's always been like really high quality, really excellent wine right from the get-go. And people, I think, have always appreciated that.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that, Kim. And that was our goal, right? We want to just make wine and sell it based on, my notoriety. And that was why our first wine, and still our flagship wine, is not called Bledsoe. It's called Doubleback. We didn't want the story to be football player starts winery. Mm-hmm. And especially, you guys know, 90s and early 2000s, there were a number of kind of athlete wine projects out there. And most of them were just not serious wine. A lot of them were essentially almost endorsement deals, rather than high quality wine. And I knew, as a wine collector and somebody that appreciated wine, I won't call myself a connoisseur, but at that point, certainly, but I discounted those wines in my own mind. It was like, just because somebody can hit a golf ball doesn't mean they can make good wine, right? And so, it was really important to us from the very start that the project be based on the quality of the juice in the bottle, not the name on the bottle. And so it was really gratifying. And there were actually kind of some funny stories too, but it was pretty gratifying with that first vintage to be named top 100 wines in the world by Wine Spectator. But it was also interesting because I think the style of the wine took some people by surprise a little bit, because I think there was a perception that because I was a football player, we were going to make like a football wine, like, big, super extracted, 17% alcohol, 200% new American oak bomb, right? And instead, we really set out at that point, and still today, to make a wine that actually, while it's a Cabernet, has some balance and has some elegance to it, which I think that kind of surprised a few people, just stylistically. The wine people kind of had this perception of what a football player wine was going to be, and then it turned out not to be that, which in some ways that shock value really helped us.
You were still playing football. How did you go about finding a vineyard, and what was the process of finding a winemaker to bring? You had a few years. Once you start the vineyard, you have a few years. You have to start thinking about who's going to make this. Did that all lead to finding Josh? And
no, there's a longer and I think in some ways more interesting story behind both of them. When we first started thinking about getting into wine, our first foray was going to be a partnership with 4 quarterbacks. It was me, Damon Heward, who I played with for actually just 1 year in New England, but we'd known each other forever from being in the Northwest. Dan Marino, and then Rick Meyer, who was the number 2 draft pick in '93 when I was drafted. And we set out with a grape grower that we know and tried to find a piece of property. That didn't work out. Turns out 4 quarterbacks, that's 3 too many. You can't have all Chiefs and no Indians. That doesn't really work very well. But I kept in contact with this farmer, and he found the first piece of property for us. We subsequently sold that vineyard and moved, because I was outside of the Walla Walla Valley. We moved back to Walla Walla for a couple of reasons. Number one, we just think the quality of the fruit in our valley is amazing. And then there's obviously the very true marketing piece of it, that's my hometown, right? But to find our first winemaker, my wife and I set out on an interview process that was very simple. We would go buy wines from Washington and we would taste wines. That was the interview process, to try to find a winemaker that made wines we like, right? And because that was what it was going to be about. It was going to be about what the wine was, right? And as we did that, we didn't find anything that knocked our socks off, at least from winemakers we thought would be available. And then I got a call from a friend in Walla Walla that said my old neighbor, Chris Figgins, was potentially looking at doing some consulting outside of his family business. Well, his family business was Leonetti Cellars. That was the original standard bearer in Washington from a quality standpoint. They were the ones that really Leonetti and Cosita Creek were the two wineries that really raised the stature of Washington as a wine grape growing region and a winemaking region. Well, Chris was, he's my next door neighbor growing up. His dad had started Leonetti. I didn't think there was any chance I wasn't even going to approach him because no, he just runs Leonetti and nobody's touching that. You can't pull him away from there. Well, he reached out and we went and had lunch, and I very quickly figured out that he was considering doing some consulting outside of the family. And I was able to convince Chris to be our first winemaker. And so he was, in addition to Leonetti and then his own winery, Figgins Estate, for the first 7 years, Chris was our consulting winemaker. Josh was his protege. Josh started working at Leonetti when he was 14 years old. And so he had grown up under the tutelage of Chris and Gary Figgins. And even though he was a young guy at that, he became our name winemaker when he was only 26.
Wow.
He'd been in wine for over half his life at that point. I was very comfortable in trusting him with the business, even though he was young at that point, because he'd had those mentors, and then he'd also studied wine. He actually started his own winery when he was in high school. Josh did. He was 16. Wow. When he was 16 years old, he started his own winery. He was still 5 years from being legal to drink alcohol. His mom didn't love the idea that he was making booze in high school, but when I see his mom, I always point out, well, at least he wasn't making drugs. I mean, he wasn't cooking meth in the basement. He was making wine.
And look at him now.
Yeah, look at him now. Right? Yeah, now he's it's been an amazing partnership. He's been our name winemaker now for over a decade. And the very unique thing about Josh, and you guys will appreciate this because you're immersed in the wine world, he's a very gifted and talented winemaker, but he also has a business brain, which, when you think about winemakers, they're artists, right? And so they're almost fundamentally predisposed to be bad at business. That art brain and the business brain, those two different sides of the brain, and they don't usually exist in the same person. And Josh actually has both. And so he's understood from the beginning that this was not a project that was just a vanity project for me. This was something that I wanted to make into a self-sustaining business in addition to making great wine. It was never going to be a hobby. We really wanted to make this into something that could sustain itself. When you start in the wine business, you always have your eyes on the distant horizon, right? This is not a tomorrow project where we're just going to throw some bottles out and make some money and move on to the next thing. You look at it as something that's going to be generational, that's something that's going to live beyond us. In order to do that, it actually has to be a real business. It can't just be a hobby.
And just for our listeners, Drew, the Josh you're talking about is Josh McDaniels, the winemaker. You'll see his name on the back of Drew's wine bottles. It was kind of a joke. Well, I wouldn't say joke, but around here, when I sell your wines, Drew, I would always say, oh, and his winemaker's Josh McDaniels. And at that time, Josh McDaniels was very much part of the Patriots. So it was a very easy
different
sell.
Josh McDaniels.
Yeah.
Different Josh McDaniels. And a lot of people just naturally assume that it's a partnership with me and the old offensive coordinator and head of the Raiders. I always point out that no, our Josh still has a job. The other one's looking for a job.
Yeah.
But the football coach Josh McDaniels I wish I could have worked with him. I never got to work with him directly. I really think he's an outstanding football coach. I'm kind of bummed his head coaching stints haven't worked out well enough for him. But our Josh, the winemaker Josh McDaniels, has learned the perils of social media because particularly when the football coach Josh was with the Raiders and they weren't doing very well, Josh, our winemaker, would get tweets from people whenever they lost a game. By the way, when they won a game, he never got congratulations. He only got criticism.
Right. Well, you know about that, right?
Kind of a statement about social media, right?
Yeah.
He said he would get two things. He would get criticism, and then he would get videos of people's sons who were playing football. Like, hey, my son plays for so-and-so high school. I think he could play for the Raiders. And he was like, well, first of all, I'm not a coach. And second of all, your kid's still in high school. So don't say that stuff.
Yeah. Jeez. There's one thing I always wanted to ask you. In 2013, you went to the Massachusetts State House to fight for direct shipping into the state. We never had direct shipping from wineries. And I always thought to myself, at the time as a retailer, it didn't really concern me because I wanted people to be able to get wines like yours directly if a distributor didn't have it. But at that time, you had a distributor in the state. Were they upset with you in any way that you were fighting to do that?
I'm sure they weren't thrilled. Part of the reason that direct shipping had not been legalized in Massachusetts was because of the strong lobbying from the distributors and so on. But what we pointed out at that time, and I really believe it has proven again to be the case in Massachusetts, is that each state, as direct shipping had become legal, they'd actually seen an uptick in distribution sales as well. So they'd actually raised the tide for both, because when people, they see a wine, they like a wine, or they hear about it from a friend, they're not, at least at that point, weren't immediately going to go to the website. They were going to go down to their local bottle shop and grab a bottle of that wine to bring home and try it for themselves. Or if they went out, even if they ordered wine directly from a winery, well, now they're into wine and they're going to want to go try other stuff. So it just, across the board raised interest and therefore raised sales in all channels, not just the direct channel. And since then, what we've witnessed in Massachusetts and in other states where the barriers have fallen down is that when we ship a lot of wine, well, the distributor also sees an uptick in sales. And so of our stuff, so one of our best distribution partners in our business is Martinetti out there in Mass. And it's also one of our best states for direct sales. So those two things actually work together. It doesn't become a cannibalization of distribution when we have direct shipping. So it's really, and I really think it's worked out well across the board.
And your direct shipping numbers, are they a bigger part of your business?
They are, yeah. We've, over the years, generally between 85 and 90% of our wine is sent direct to the consumer.
Wow.
So it's a really small percentage of, now that's changing, especially with our Bledsoe family Cabernet. We're really growing that side of our business on the distribution side. And for our business, those things definitely go hand in hand. When we have a better, bigger distribution presence in a state, we also see an uptick in direct sales. So in some ways, we almost view it as a marketing endeavor. Then we're in the right wine shops and the right restaurants, and when the retailers and the restaurant owners and so on know about our wine and they're representing it to their customers are buying it from a bottle shop or buying it at dinner, but they also then are also buying it from us directly.
That helps everybody.
It does. Yeah, for sure.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Mark and Kim, and today with our very special guest, Drew Bledsoe. You can find more information about Mark at franklinliquors.com and more information about myself and my classes at commonwealthwineschool.com. We're supported by Franklin Public Radio, and for more information about Drew's wines, go to bledsoewineestates.com. So we are here today with our very special guest, Drew Bledsoe, and we have the opportunity to taste a couple of his wines side by side and talk about them, and we love to taste wines on this show, so it's always a pleasure to be able to taste them with the people who are responsible for them. So we're really excited about this.
Just to give the listeners in our Massachusetts area some information, Drew has a few different lines. He has the double back line, he has the Bledsoe family wine, and he has the Bledsoe McDaniels line. And I believe in Massachusetts right now, there's only one Bledsoe McDaniels wine, which we're going to taste, the Pinot Noir. And the family wine, you can get Chardonnay and Cabernet, and the Elizabeth Chardonnay every once in a while. And the double back, you can get the Cab, the Reserve Cab, and the Merlot, which I can never find, Drew. It's never in stock. So
we don't make that much Merlot, but we're making more and more because it's Merlot. We're really seeing Merlot make a comeback. We're finally overcoming the movie Sideways and seeing Merlot make a comeback, which is
from like 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So funny story. We had a Merlot symposium at our winery where we had all these great Merlot producers from up and down the West Coast come to the winery. Well, the guy that wrote the screenplay for Sideways showed up at the Merlot Symposium. I was like, man, you're going to get killed. Like these people hate you. You ruined their business. And he said, no, I didn't ruin Merlot. I saved Merlot because there were so many really manufactured, inauthentic wines that were being labeled as Merlot. He goes, he goes, and his prediction, he said, it's going to take a while, but those of you that are making serious Merlot are going to benefit from this in the long term. And that's been the case. It's just taken 20 some years for it to get there. But I thought it was really brave of him to show up at a Merlot Symposium and risk his life like that.
So as far as your vineyards, you kind of are in Cabernet country when it comes to terroir for particular grapes in the Walla Walla region. What made you want to kind of expand into Merlot and Chardonnay and some of these other grape varieties?
Yeah, the Merlot produced in Walla Walla, really starting with Leonetti that I mentioned earlier, I really think they've been among the best Merlots in the world for a long time.
Yeah, and they're known for their Merlots and always have been for decades and decades.
Yeah. So all of the Bordeaux varietals and honestly the Rhone varietals as well do very well in the Walla Walla Valley. There's some amazing Syrah. We're actually growing some Grenache now. We haven't done any more Vedra, but our Viognier usually gets blended in with our Syrah, but we bottled some Viognier on its own, and it's really fantastic stuff. So the Rhone varietals do really well in our region as well.
So we're tasting the 2021 Bledsoe McDaniels Pinot, and this is something you're sourcing from Willamette.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So after I retired, we've lived in Oregon. That's where my wife is from. She's from Portland, which is part of the Willamette Valley. And we've been Pinot Noir fans for a long time, especially the stuff that comes from here in the Willamette. There's some decent, Russian River Valley stuff from California and so on. But the Willamette Valley of Oregon has really, to me, been, probably the best producer of Pinot Noir in the United States for a lot of years. And so, we were collectors and consumers of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir for a long time. And then we decided a number of years ago that we were going to dip our toe into that water, if you will. Pinot Noir has always made me nervous as a business owner because it's on the wetter, cooler side of the state. And it seems like, in the places where Pinot Noir does the best, you're always kind of flirting with disaster because, you're in a region that's not as warm. And so you're always kind of flirting with not having a vintage, get some particularly cold years like 2011, 2007. A lot of the Pinot producers in the Willamette Valley really struggled because it just didn't get warm. And so it made me nervous. But initially what we did, we were buying fruit from some producers that we really believed in the first two vintages. And again, that selection process was really quite simple. We just went to areas that produced wines that we liked and bought fruit from those producers. It really was just that simple. And then we were presented with this amazing opportunity. Geez, probably 4 years ago, I'm gonna say, to acquire a vineyard in the southern part of the Willamette Valley and the Eola Hills. But it's a funny story because it was a vineyard that was planted by this wonderful lady by the name of Mimi Castile. Her family had started Bethel Heights, which was one of the original wineries in the Willamette Valley. But Mimi was and is just truly a thought leader in regenerative agriculture, taking care of the land in the way that Mother Nature intended. And she had planted this vineyard, which at that point was called Hopewell. We've since renamed it to Cooley. And the fruit that she was selling was going into some of the most highly regarded Pinot Noirs from some other producers, like Lingua Franca and Bergstrom. And so we knew that the fruit was great, but we found out through some friends that she was considering selling this vineyard. It wasn't on the market. So we went to meet with her, and we had researched her. She had researched us. But it was funny because when we were going to meet with her, if you were going to put us in stereotypical boxes, right? Well, you have Mimi, who is, hippie Mother Earth chick, in one stereotypical box, and me, who's big dumb jock, in the other stereotypical box. Well, those two boxes weren't friends in high school, right? They didn't get along very well, right? Yep. And so, we're going to this meeting with Mimi, and I'm like, geez, we're behind in this game. I hope that she doesn't hate me, because if you're just going to stereotype us, that's what she would be. And so we got there to meet with her. And sure enough, just right on script, Mimi pulls up in her Prius. I pulled up in my big diesel truck, parked next to her. And I got out, and sure enough, Mimi's wearing a tie-dyed tank top. And I'm like, oh man, we're so far behind in this game. So I got out of the truck and I walked over and said, hi, Mimi, nice to meet you. I'm Drew. And she said, we've actually met before. I said, really? She goes, yeah, I went to school at Tulane and I was on the training staff when you guys were practicing for the Super Bowl. So I poured you Gatorade every day and you were actually really nice. I was like, oh, wow. So just because
Win.
it was a huge win. It was a huge win, Kim. But the real truth was that Mimi had researched our business and researched what we're about. And she was very, very serious about only entrusting this piece of land to another company that was going to treat it the way that she did and take care of the land in the way that she had. And that's been who we've been about from the beginning. And so we were fortunate enough that she did entrust us with that piece of ground. And boy, we've just been in love with the fruit ever since. We're still, the Pinot Noir that you guys are tasting is roughly half from our estate vineyard and then also half from Ribbon Ridge, which is another small AVA within the Willamette Valley that's produced some of our favorite wines over the years. And what we find is that our estate vineyard supplies a little more structure and a little more tannin, whereas Ribbon Ridge fruit is really pretty and bright. And so the two of those in combination, I think, makes something that's pretty special.
Yeah, it's a beautiful Pinot.
Yeah, it's a really pretty Pinot Noir. I love, we were talking before about sort of the bastardization of Merlot, and Pinot Noir has certainly seen its fair share of blending and not necessarily expressing pure Pinot Noir fruit over the years. But just even looking at the color of yours, you can tell that this is just classic Oregon Pinot. And there's that spice note. I almost got like an orange rind kind of on the nose, but there's this real characteristic Willamette nose that I think comes along with really good Pinot from the region that's got that earthiness to it. And this one really shows the smell of the place, for lack of a better term.
No, I love that description, Kim. When we launched the Bledsoe McDaniels project, it's two-pronged. It's largely based on Pinot Noir, but then we're also making some small productions, single vineyard Syrah under that label from 3 different special places in the Walla Walla Valley. And we got some pushback, honestly, from some people. It's like, no, you can't do a project that's Pinot and Syrah. Those things are so different. And we acknowledge that, but we also felt like Pinot and Syrah, of at least of the in our minds, of the very mainstream varietals, were the most adept at expressing the place that they're grown. Pinot Noir, I mean, there are Pinot Noir grapes grown in lots of different places, and you're right with the bastardization of Pinot. Like some of them grown in these super hot climates where they produce 10 or 12 tons per acre and let them get overripe, and it almost doesn't seem, it's not Pinot anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't express like classic
exactly.
Pinot. Yeah,
exactly. And we really wanted to make sure that in both situations, in both varietals under that label, that we were really expressing where the grapes were grown. One thing that I have really appreciated about what Josh has been able to do with our Pinot Noir is that it is, you're right. It's real Pinot Noir. It's elegant. It's light, but elegance doesn't have to mean thinness, and so those things don't have to. It can be elegant and still have body and still have texture.
Right.
And I really love that fine line that Josh has been able to walk, where it's real Pinot, it's true Pinot, but it also has some palate weight, it has some texture to it, and I really appreciate that, because it's not it is an elegant wine, but it's not thin, and I really appreciate that. I'm ashamed to admit how much of the Pinot we actually drink at our own home.
Don't be ashamed of that.
No, we bring it home, and we'll bring home a box of the Pinot Noir, of our Bledsoe McDaniels Pinot Noir, with the intent of putting it in the cellar and letting it lay down for a few years to see how it ages. And next thing you know, the box is empty because it goes down so easy.
A common problem for a lot of us.
Right. Yeah.
That quality shows on the finish. It's just really smooth, elegant.
I was
finish.
actually going to say that
Right.
the finish of the wine, and to your point about can have this lighter style of wine without it being thin and wussy. And I think that that's a little bit of a hump that some novice wine drinkers, especially for red wines, kind of have to get over. It's a lighter style of wine, but that doesn't make it any less powerful. It might not be dark and it might not have the tannins that a Cabernet has, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have the complexity. And I think yours really shows this really nice balance between flavor concentration, but also showing what a Pinot Noir should be all about.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kim. You can write would have you write some copy for our website, because
I do that actually.
Yeah, you're absolutely nailing in perfect words what we're trying to accomplish with the Pinot Noir. And one interesting piece of this is Josh had made his name on Bordeaux varietals and Syrah, and I was sort of curious, and I think he was kind of curious. I think a lot of people were curious that have known him for a while. All right, how's he going to do with Pinot Noir? it's a very different thing, making Pinot. I mean, you have to be so gentle with it. We don't rack it. We don't, we're just very, very gentle with the entire process, where Cabernet, you're just beating it up all the time. You're racking it every few months, and you're trying to get it lots of oxygen, and Pinot is a very different animal to make in the true Pinot style. But Josh has said now, and I'm not putting words in his mouth because I've heard him say this a number of times, he really feels like not only did his experience in making Cabernet help him in making Pinot Noir that still has structure and still has tannin, but he also feels like his experience with Pinot Noir has made him better as a Cabernet winemaker. And while they're so different in terms of the process, there is some translation between the two that he really feels like has helped him on both sides of that equation, both on the Cabernet and the Pinot side.
That's cool.
And the packaging is great. You do a great job. Is that you and Josh etched in the bottle?
It is, yeah. Yeah, we decided sort of a little nod to Chateauneuf du Pape, even though that we wanted to have a cartouche on the bottle. And the funny piece of that story is our designer that we were working with when we did that design, his first run at doing that cartouche with me and Josh on the bottle, well, when he was designing it, he just took two silhouettes of me and put them side by side, so they were the same height. And I'm like, wait a second, no, I mean, Josh is not a little guy; he's 6 feet tall, but he's not as tall as I am. Nobody's going to believe that Josh is 6'5" and I'm 6'5". So like, you got to shrink this one down a little bit. Yeah, it's I really like having that cartouche on the bottle. I think it gives it a little touch of class that helps it stand out.
And we don't have any of the Bledsoe family wines to taste with you today, but they sell very well. And I loved when you did that family leader bottle of the blend. And I heard that was a story. You discovered that in Italy or something.
Yeah, we did. We were on a research and development trip, if you will, to Italy, meaning we were driving around Italy trying a lot of different wines. And we did Italy, at least part of the trip. And I think the best way to do it, we drove around and got lost, and we ended up stopping in at this little roadside restaurant, and we walked in, and Mara and I, neither one of us speak any Italian. And this cute little lady that came out to take care of us, she didn't speak any English. So we grabbed the menu and just kind of pointed at something on the menu, and then said Vino Rosso, because that was what we knew, was red wine. And she came out of the back with a 1 liter carafe like that she'd filled up in the kitchen. And of course, the wine was delicious, like it always is in Italy. And Mara looked at me and she goes, "That's what we should do with the family wine. We should bottle it in that." And yeah, that's continued to be a fun project. And people keep the bottles, they fill them with water, make them water bottles on the table, and we do the same at our house. Yeah, it's been a fun project to have that secondary, I guess. And now it's technically our third cab blend after the Bledsoe family cab. But it's a real credit to our entire team, from the farming team, which I want to talk about in a minute, all the way through our entire process. That it's essentially our bulk wine. It's the stuff that didn't make it into the other blends, but the wine is still great. And so it's just a credit to our entire team that even the stuff that is just the family wine, just the bulk wine, is still of such high quality. And that it's funny that the only drawback to that packaging, that 1 liter carafe, is that I think the packaging leads people to believe that it's not serious wine.
Yeah,
which it actually is serious wine. It's just in a more lighthearted package. So that's been a fun project for us. We just last month just bottled the most recent vintage of family wine, and it's still fantastic.
Packaging makes a statement. Really does.
Yeah.
What we really wanted with that one was, look, if you go to Europe, wine doesn't have all the pomp and circumstance that you experience so much of the time in the U.S. People just drink wine, and we wanted that package to say that, okay, this is something you can do in the United States too. It doesn't have to be presented tableside with all the pomp and circumstance and then all of that stuff. You're like, no, just drink some wine. Flip the top and drink some wine. And so that's been a fun project for us.
Do you have that one, Mark? Or can't get it?
We had it, but I don't think it's not. I haven't seen it for a couple of years.
Yeah,
now.
It's not. We don't send it out into distribution anymore. The Bledsoe family Cabernets, and because the one drawback to that package is that we cannot automate that on a bottling line. They have to be hand filled, and then all of those tops have to be put on manually. And so to bottle 500 cases of family wine takes a week, and to where you can bottle 3,000 cases of family wine in one day, and to do 500 cases of family of the 1 liter carafes takes a week. So it just is too labor intensive to do enough of it to send it out to distribution.
The Bledsoe family cab is a good way to start people to get them up into the next wine we want to try with you, Drew, is the double back cab, the king of wines for you. And it was my first vintage I sold of yours was the 2017, and which ended up being top 100 in the world, correct? Was the 17 vintage?
I think the ones that have, there are a number of them that have received pretty high. The 07 was the first one, and that was top 100. I think the 14, and then maybe it was the 17, just made it to some of those top 100 kinds of lists. But I'll have to go back and verify. I've got a lot of vintages under my belt now. It's hard to keep track of everything, but
it's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, at least
good problem to have.
at least we're collecting trophies, not collecting bad bottles of wine.
Yeah. So this is the 21 vintage, which the blend now is 75% cab. And I noticed the past few vintages a little less cab, a little more maybe Malbec Merlot. Is that because of climate, or are you finding better quality of the other grapes being grown?
Yeah, I mean, it honestly, Mark, vintage to vintage, it's purely about what we're tasting in our blending trials. And we do those blending trials. Now, the one stipulation is that it will always be at least 75% Cabernet, because we have to be 75% to call it a Cabernet. But when we do our blending trials, do them blind, double blind actually, where Josh will tell Joe, his associate winemaker, what the blends are. And so Joe will go put together the blends, and then we'll have CJ, who's our cellar assistant, label the blends. So none of us know which blend is which when we do our blending trials. And it's just purely based on what we think is the best wine for that vintage. If we ever thought that 100% Cabernet was the best wine we could make in that vintage, it would be 100% Cabernet. But I do think it's a testament to the quality of the fruit that's coming off of particularly our estate vineyards. We started growing some Cab Franc a number of years ago, and on the estate reserve, all of a sudden that Cab Franc has jumped into that blend. But pretty much I think every vintage has, and I got to go back and look at them, but most of the vintages have had at least some Merlot. We've had varying amounts of Petit Verdot and Malbec over the years, and then the Cab Franc has generally only made it into the estate reserve. But it's just purely based on what blend we think gives us the most complexity and the most interesting and tasty wine year in and year out that determines the blends.
Yeah, this wine's beautiful. I think Kim was mentioning the first time we tasted it about a spice note. The aroma is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also a lot of that kind of floral violet note that you sometimes get with like better cabs from Bordeaux, and I'm definitely picking it up in here.
Yeah.
That little like really pretty sort of flowery.
I noticed it said 6% Italian concrete. Do you have eggs in the winery?
We do, although we've been instructed by our supplier to call them tulips, not eggs, because we're in the wine business and we have to use flowery language.
Tulips.
Yeah, but
I've never heard that. Okay.
Yeah, that was from our concrete supplier. So they are, for those that have never seen these, they do look like giant concrete eggs, but they're flat on the top. And so he said, no, you're in the wine business. You have to call them tulips. Like, okay, we'll call them concrete tulips. What we discovered a number of years ago as we're aging the wine, because now we also are now fermenting in concrete in addition to aging. And what we discovered was that what the concrete does is it still allows the wine to age. It allows for it is somewhat permeable, so it allows for some oxidation of the wine, allows to age, but it does that without affecting the flavor of the wine. And so you get just a pure expression of fruit with no oak impact when you age in concrete. And like I say, it's I think it's been varying amounts. We'll never produce a Cabernet, at least I don't think we will produce a Cabernet that's 100% concrete, because we do feel like that oak impact has a place. We've never wanted the oak to be the star of the show. We really feel like to plagiarize one of my sommelier friends, like the oak should be the frame, not the artwork. And another guy, he's Greg Harrington, who's a great friend, great winemaker as well. His other comment, he said that oak is like salt in a meal. If there's no salt, the meal falls flat. If there's too much salt, it's all you taste. So we feel like oak has a place, but it just shouldn't be the star of the show. It should be in the background. But, I just, in tasting the wines from the concrete, it's just pure fruit. And we really like that aspect as a piece of the blend. But it's also fun when people come to do barrel tasting and so on. You can go try some Cabernet out of concrete, and you're like, yeah, this is what the fruit tastes like with no oak. And it's a cool experience. But then it also that oak impact from the rest of the blend deserves to be there.
Well, you definitely can notice that it does have the oak barrel aromas and flavors on there, but it's not that being smacked over the head with burnt toast or anything like that. It's like you said, kind of a frame. So it's more of that, like, for me, it's like an herbal, like an herbal spice aroma to it. It's definitely there, but it's not the star of the show. That fruit really, that berry fruit really comes through a lot.
Well, and that's, look, we're extremely blessed with where we're growing our wine grapes. We just have amazing land and quite a lot of diversity too in the terroir in our valley, where we have 5 different vineyards that all have their own distinct characteristics. And then we have great people, and that's something I want to talk about a little bit too, that curate that for us to bring that fruit in. But when you're blessed to be where we are and have this amazing fruit, that fruit should be the star of the show, not the winemaking process, not the barrels. The fruit should be the star of the show because it's great fruit. If we had bad fruit, then we'd have to manipulate it and hide it. But we want that fruit to be out front. But one of the things over the past, I guess, 5 years now, that's become really key to our business has been around this word sustainability. We talked a little bit earlier about, what we've done environmentally with our vineyards, with the carefully curated cover crops and biodiversity plantings in and around the vineyards. And we're very intentional about how we use water. Matter of fact, in a lot of cases now, we're not mowing anymore. Instead, we're coming in and laying these cover crops down, which helps with water retention. We are moving toward the potential on, and it'll probably take a little while, but we could potentially start dry farming in Walla Walla, which is a very hot region, but we've seen that happen. Obviously, that's how it works in the old world, but really have always taking care of the land. To us, that's been the obvious piece of sustainability, right? If you're gonna produce a product that comes from the land, you should take care of the land, right? But what we've seen really over the last 5 years has been more around people sustainability. So think about farming, particularly in northern climates, you're generally talking about contracted labor. You're talking about, seasonal labor, where people will come work for you for 7 or 8 months. And then in the wintertime, they have to figure out how they're going to feed their family, whether that's going on welfare or going south. But starting in 2019, we formed our own farming company, which is now up to 25 people. These people work for us full time now. We pay them better than anybody else in the Northwest. They have retirement benefits and health benefits. And most importantly, what these people have for the first time in their recent family history is they have stability. They don't have to worry about where the next paycheck comes from, how they're going to take care of their son or daughter if they get sick. And for us, when we did that, it's the right thing to do, right? And we like to do the right thing. We like it when our moms are proud of us. But what we've discovered is that taking care of those people the way that we have is really good business for us, because now they treat our vineyards as if they own them. And they talk about our vineyards. They don't talk about boss's vineyards. And Josh has even admitted in more recent years, he used to take pride in knowing our vineyards better than anybody else does. And he says now that's not the case, because these people that work for us have now worked our vineyards in some cases for over a decade, and they now know these vines better than anybody else in the world. Because of that, they get better care and very personalized care for the vines, and we're producing better fruit. We also, from the combination of how we treat the environment and how our people treat the vines, we're seeing healthier vines, so we're not having to replant. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're producing better and better fruit each year, and that's really exciting to me to see our 21. And then we recently were tasting through the 22 and 23s. I think our wines are still getting better, and that's a really cool thing after 17 years in the business to think that your best wines are still in front of you. That part's been really exciting. But it's really about how we've embraced taking care of the environment, taking care of the people, that's allowed us to continue to improve year over year.
That's a great story.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Good for you. So the last thing I have to ask you, Drew, you said you lived in Franklin. How do you compare towns in Massachusetts to Walla Walla size-wise? Is Franklin bigger than Walla Walla?
How big is Walla Walla?
I don't know. What's the population of Franklin?
Like 32,000.
Yeah, so it's very similar in size to Walla Walla. Honestly, some of the small towns in New England really remind me of the town I grew up in. I grew up in a town with tree-lined streets and sidewalks and, pretty neighborhoods. And again, there were so many things that were somewhat surprising to me when I moved out there to New England. I thought we were going to be out there and it was going to be a concrete jungle, like everything was a city. And we got out there, I was like, no, it's actually really pretty. And so it was immediately familiar feeling to me when I got there. And yeah, you look at the pictures of Walla Walla and if you're just looking at the town, it kind of reminds you of New England. If you pull back a little bit, then we got rolling hills and wheat fields, which is different, but the town itself does have a very kind of New England feel to it. It's much newer. The oldest buildings in Walla Walla were built in the 1880s. In New England, the oldest, they're built in the 1400s. But yeah, no, it definitely felt very familiar to me when we moved out there, and that was a very pleasant surprise, to be honest with you.
Nice.
Great.
We
Well,
like
thank
it
you
here.
so much.
We love coming back to visit also.
Nice. Well,
Thank
this
you,
has been
Drew.
wonderful. Yes, thank you for taking the time to talk to us on our show, and it was great to revisit your wines, which I hadn't tasted in a few years.
Right on. Well, we sure
Yeah.
appreciate it, guys. Thank you for the
Awesome.
support.
You're welcome.
Next time we're back out there, maybe I'll pop into the shop real quick, Mark, and come say hi.
Yeah, I'd love that. Love to see you. Since you didn't come in when you lived here, I won't tell you the other players who did.
Yeah.
Ouch.
You probably know who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you running the shop back then, Mark?
Well, I worked here all my life, so
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. That's true.
like I was saying, that was my rookie year when we lived in Franklin. At that point we were still just drinking beer and whiskey.
yeah.
And I would
It's changed a little bit since then.
I would make Todd Rucci and Max Lane and some of those guys. I would pay, but they had to go to the liquor store, so I would give them the money. They would go shopping.
Those were the days.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thank you for listening to The Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Today, our special guest has been Drew Bledsoe. You can get more information about Drew and his wines at bledsoewineestates.com. For more information about Kim, you can go to commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, you can go to franklinliquors.com. Our show is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find all our information, past shows, the current shows, on our Facebook page, The Wonderful World of Wine. Cheers.
Hey, cheers, everybody.